everybody, and welcome to Raising Vibrations and to the monthly forecasts. Hope you're doing well. And in today's video, I'm going to be helping you understand a little bit about aspects and phases. And this is my little piece on how I do my little forecasts in a unique way. So aspects and phases is a way that evolutionary astrology uses to measure the cycles that planets have in relationship to themselves, okay, and to other planets, pardon me. So what happens is you've got two planets, say for instance Pluto and Venus, and what evolutionary astrology will do is they will take those two archetypes and measure the relationship that they have between each other, and then from that measurement and from that relationship establish what type of phase and what type of evolutionary condition those planets carry within each other. And it's really fascinating because when you begin to measure your planets in relationship to other planets, you begin to see the development of how you actually experience your life through these aspects and phases. Now, I've got a little slideshow over here quickly that I want to show you in terms of what is the philosophy behind aspects and phases and what type of methodology do we use to actually measure this, okay? So I'm going to show you that right now. Okay, so what you're looking at is two pictures. On the left-hand side over here, you can see this is about life itself, okay? The first thing that we understand is that everything is in a cyclic formation. Everything is moving through time and space. And so because of that, it is not separate that when you look at two planets or three planets in a birth chart, that they are also in this life cycle. There is a life cycle that each planet has. And each planet in relationship to another is reflecting where that life cycle is. It's no different than measuring a new moon, a first quarter moon, a last quarter moon, and a full moon. They're exactly the same thing. We just do it with planets now. And you can see that when you have a new moon, there's a new intention. When you have a full moon, we're coming into a halfway completion cycle. Again, phasal relationship and life, how it's evolving. The picture on the right-hand side reflects to us that everything is in relationship to everything else. Everything. Okay, it's like a revolving door. The moment that you walk through a revolving door, as you're moving outward, somebody from the outside is coming inward, and that door is revolving us around it. And it's like as one energy moves outward like that, another one's moving in. And everything is in a consistent relationship with everything else. And so because of that, it's natural for us to understand that when we look at planets in our birth chart, there's a natural cycle in terms of awareness, and there's a natural phasal relationship that exists between planets. And when we measure that, what we get is this beautiful harmonic dynamic of where we are in our consciousness and how that has been developed. Okay? And the next thing is how do we actually then establish and what methodology do we use in order to understand these aspects and phases? Well, in evolutionary astrology, you work with the planets, okay? So you've got Mercury, Venus, you've got Mars, you've got Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, okay? And then you have the sun. Now, in this diagram, everything revolves around the sun. So when you measure something in evolutionary astrology terms, there's always a focal point, right? There's a focal point, and there's always a planet that's in relationship to that focal point. And the way that you understand what focal point you have to look at, you understand the relationship that these planets have to the sun. So the sun will always be a focal point, okay? That's so when you say, for instance, want to understand the phasal relationship between Neptune and Jupiter, well, then it has a little bit of a different cycle, but still the same. When you measure planets in relationship to each other, you're measuring the fastest moving planet in relationship to the slowest moving planet. The fastest moving planet in relationship to the slowest moving planet. So therefore, if I had to say, for instance, ask you, what is the phasal relationship between Jupiter and Neptune? You would go, Jupiter is the fastest moving planet, Neptune's the slowest moving planet, and so therefore, Neptune would be your focus point, because the slowest moving planet is always the focus point. And that's the key that I want you to take away from this conversation. When you measure aspects and phases in your chart, you're measuring two things. One, if you're measuring it against the sun will always be a focus point. So you're always looking for the focus point. And that will always be the sun if you're comparing it against something. Secondly, if you're comparing two planets with each other, you always measure the slowest moving planet as the focus point. So what happens now is you go, okay, I've identified that Neptune is the slowest moving planet. Jupiter's in relationship to it. And so then how do I understand how this works? Very simple. You get a little chart. And this is courtesy of the Evolutionary Astrology glossary, an ebook. And as you can see here on the chart, you've got this whole entire thing. New phase, crescent phase, first quarter phase, gibbous phase, all these phases. And each phase represents an aspect of development. So what you would do is you would take your slowest moving planet and put it at the 0. You would take your fastest moving planet and mathematically calculate the degrees of separation. Okay, so if Neptune's here and Jupiter, say for instance here, you would see that Jupiter is exactly 90 degrees, 90 clicks away from Neptune. And by understanding that phasal relationship, you would go, okay, it's a crisis in action square. And this is what I love about it so much. When we look at squares in astrology, we're like, oh, it's a square. But in EA, there's two types of squares. There's a crisis in action square and a crisis in consciousness square. And they're remarkably different in the sense. Okay, so you can actually try and read your chart. So, I've got Pluto square Mars as an example. The way that Pluto square Mars is going to work in your chart, if it was crisis in consciousness versus crisis in action, are going to be remarkably different. Now, when you have that power within your own awareness to apply that to your chart, you can actually see what you're specifically looking at in terms of your evolutionary development. And it's really, really fascinating. So the next time you begin to understand your chart in terms of aspects and phases, I highly encourage you to learn about aspects and phases, to go and investigate it. And part of my astrology school, I actually teach this when I educate anybody that's wanting to understand evolutionary astrology. So this is something that when you really want to get into astrology, it's something you don't like miss, because it's so empowering. I'll give you a quick example again, just before we jump into this, okay? Let's say, for instance, I have Jupiter and I'm measuring Mars and Jupiter, okay? We know that Jupiter is the slowest moving planet in relationship to Mars. So Jupiter stands there, and we will say that Mars is exactly 300 degrees, okay, away from Jupiter. In other words, Mars has gone all the way around the astrology chart like that because it's moving in that motion, and it gets all the way to that 300 degrees over there. Now, Mars is what is called in a last quarter phase in relationship to Jupiter. So when you look at Mars and Jupiter in the chart and you understand that phasal relationship, you can actually see that the soul's desires in this lifetime, this is the evolutionary astrology, the soul's desires in this lifetime are actually evolving through individuating, in other words, finding and breaking out of the mold of belief systems that they used in the past and allowing us to see perspectives from different unique points of views. That's the way that Mars and Jupiter, in a very plain way, would be operating in somebody's chart. Now, you come into a world that is very like homogenized and very sort of like, this is how truth is and this is what it's got to be. And you put somebody in that's natural tendency is to not follow those rules. Can you begin to see the way that we as human beings are so complex? That's why we have a lot of people in the world saying, well, I'm an atheist, because most of them have got phasal relationships that are breaking down, that are not listening to the general consensus. How much do we accept other people for having their own evolutionary degree? We don't understand it, so therefore we judge it. And this is the type of dynamics that we can get into when we understand more of who we are as a human race to alleviate the chaos that we've got. Food for thought. Hello, Aquarius friends, and welcome to your sun sign forecast for the month of March 2017, and I hope you're well. And I hope you enjoyed the introduction video, talking a little bit about the nature of aspects and phases and how that actually plays out in our lives in terms of understanding how EA can map the evolution of our soul through just the relationships that the planets have to each other and where they are in that cyclic form. Okay, so let's go ahead and check out what's actually going on for you, Aquarius. Now, of course, we always pay attention to the symbol of Pluto, and Pluto always represents to us the deep unconscious patterning and the nature of how life is changing for us in a way that is really about evolution. And of course, for you, since 2008, it's really been in your 12th house. And what has really been like influencing the nature of your life in this unconscious way is understanding the nature of power, understanding the nature of how and where it gets applied, and what it means to actually be in flow with life, where you have a higher sense of energy moving through you as a way of direction, versus more about being in control on an ego level. So the ego level will be something that is our personality, like our personal desire. But of course, personal desire is something that's more influenced by our biology, the way that we're feeling in a certain day, whereas, and of course, sort of our traumas and uncomfortable situations that we've experienced throughout our lives. So with 12th house stuff, it's in your solar 12th house, you're learning how to align your direction with life in accordance with a higher meaning. And of course, as you kind of go through life, at least since 2008, you've really been watching this process unfold for you in a big way. Now, of course, part of this process, I feel for this month, is deeply about Venus, and in particular, Venus retrograde. And Venus retrograde is the focus point, like I said. Now, if you saw in the video, we had the aspects and phases, and to me, this month of March, it's about the relationship that Mars has to Uranus. That's a new phase relationship that you see there. And Venus and Uranus are in a balsamic phase. Venus and Mars are in a balsamic phase. So we can see there's a completion cycle taking place here, and there's a new beginning cycle happening at the same time. And you'll watch that as we move through March, everything will move out of your second solar house, out of the Pisces element, and into your third, which is communication, connection. I wouldn't be surprised that what comes into your field of awareness right now is the way that you express yourself, the way that your opinions and ideas get, come across. And also, wanting to be curious, even learning something new for the first time would be something great. And the nature of communication, per se, is something that I feel will become very highly emphasized for you in this month. But if we go over to how the planets are actually moving, and we go over to the 9th of March, you can actually see here that Mars moves into the constellation Taurus, and that's your 4th house. So of course, the nature of your home is going to come into play a little bit. But also, because we're focusing on Venus, we're looking at the dynamics of what is being let go, balsamic phase, and what is being recreated in a new way. Aries, okay, Mars, should I say. And Mars moving into Taurus, it's co-ruled with Libra, okay? Taurus and Libra are two signs that are ruled by the planet Venus. Venus talks about the nature of our inner relationship to ourselves, and then how we externalize that with other people. And so Jupiter plays a big role in this experience as well. And you can see there's an opposition consistently happening with Uranus. So it tells us a lot about what's going on. You can see here that we've got a lot of attention towards our inner sense of identity, the nature of our expectations, the nature of how we develop the social rules and regulations around how to be. Okay, so Mars moving into Taurus initiates this new cycle that's about to take place with us for March. And when we move over to the 12th of March, we've got a full moon happening in Virgo, 22 degrees. And if you look, we had a new moon happen in Pisces, and it was also a solar eclipse. And that solar eclipse brought us an intense amount of insight, and also began the process of this final completion cycle that we're on at this stage for this year. And as we're getting into this full moon experience, we're doing the same thing. It's a beautiful analogy, actually. It's like you have a book and you read this book and you go on this journey. And when you finish the book, you gain some insight and you understand some stuff, but you don't strap the book to your body as a way of remembering it. You kind of just put the book down, let it, put it away. And you carry with yourself these insights from this book in your consciousness. And whenever you go through life, you kind of just apply these ideas that you got through a book. And it's kind of the same thing. This full moon is talking about the integration process of all this most recent evolutionary cycle that we've gone through, for the last 4 years at least. A lot of insights, a lot of understanding. And it's now time to begin integrating these insights in the new path. And that is what this is about. As we transition into the end of March, you'll see that we're moving away from the old and going into the new. And the way that we understand the new is by bringing the insights of the past into the new as a way of landing foundation. Okay. And it's a really interesting month, because look what happens on the 13th of March. Okay, Mercury moves into Aries, so it's out of Pisces, and the moon hits Jupiter. All right, so from those insights, the mind immediately goes into the constellation Aries, saying new direction. Okay, and it's in your solar third house, so of course new direction and communication is a big thing for you. But then you also look in your ninth house, the moon hits Jupiter and says, okay, what type of core philosophies and belief systems do you use, and how are those in a sense related to the ongoing evolutionary cycle that your life is actually evolving, right? So you'll come into this awareness of like, what truth are you holding? What perspective do you use towards seeing life? Okay, how do you exploring culture? And that will spark the next phase of thinking processes around this new value, this new sense of needs. Remember, the whole entire month is about Venus. So as Venus is retrograding, it's changing and it's reshaping relative to these outer cycles. And by the 14th, 13th of March, we'll begin to understand these new things. We'll begin to want to question these new things. And then move over a little bit and look what happens on the 20th of March. The moon hits Saturn. And as it hits Saturn, the sun enters Aries. So two very important key players of planetary pairs of Saturn and Jupiter, when the moon hits it, something moves into Aries, initiating the next step. The sun moving into Aries is now leaving Pisces over here, and we're like, okay, now we're putting the flashlight. There's a lot of attention, a lot of energy in the Aries constellation that is saying, right, let's go, let's go. And of course, the moon conjunct Saturn is saying, what is the truth that you hold? What is the core philosophy? And also, how is that relating to groups that you belong to? What's your tribe? How do you associate yourself with people? You know, that will be like a key player on the 20th of March. And then as we move over to the 22nd of March, this is the kind of day where you kind of get some popcorn, you just rent a movie and you sit at home. Look at the squares that are taking place over here on the chart. Lots of intense energy. And this is the time when Pluto and the moon make a connection. Another big experience of emotional breaking down and evolutionary necessity. So at the core level, on a deep psychological level, all of what was happening before the 22nd has now come to a point in which we're going to uproot everything. Okay, that's the final letting go process. From here on out, it's complete and utter new direction. And then just 3 days later, on the 25th, look what happens. The moon hits the south node, which is in Pisces, also hits Neptune. And Venus and Mars and the sun switch places. Look here. Okay, they switch places. So another beautiful showing of how this ending of the cycle is occurring. We have Pluto and the moon create the emotional shock, or the emotional letting go process. We then apply the compassion and inner wisdom and understanding. With the moon hitting the south node, we're finally letting go. And the sun and the moon switch places, and we're like ready to now allow ourselves to explore this new direction. We're like excited. We're wanting to experiment. We're wanting to have courage. We're wanting to find this new direction for us, whatever it might be. We have the energy now behind us in that sense. And then just 2 days later, we have the beautiful new moon that takes place in Aries. Okay, and that's happening in your solar third house, Aquarius. So of course, this is again about a new way of communicating, a new way of expressing yourself, a new way of discovering things within your life. And it's going out of your second house of finances and abundance and resources into socialization. So this new moon that's going to happen on the 27th is going to be a real awesome opportunity to find new discovery, new excitement, new sense of personal understanding in your life and how you communicate. So watch that in that sense, okay? All right, everyone. I really hope that this gives you a sense of direction regarding the month of March and how your inner sense of values are going to be adjusting for you, and how when Venus actually goes into Pisces, which will be literally, I think, around the 3rd or 2nd of April, okay, as Venus enters Pisces, it's going to begin to open us up and say, okay, so what is the inspiration that we want to going forward? And that's what's really going to happen for us as we move into April. Like, we're going to be applying inspiration. We're going to be applying new things out. We're going to eventually get into the state of like, okay, this is the new sense. These are the expectations I place on myself. This is what I want. And you're going to be fully getting into that process in a very profound way. So exciting times coming along for us. Okay, my Aquarius friends, have a fantastic month. And I forgot to mention to you, but on the 11th of March, I'm starting a astrology school. So if you want to participate in learning astrology, understanding karmic dynamics, in the description below is a link to sign up for that. Otherwise, you can always send me an email. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you want before you jump into that, okay? All right, have a fantastic day. Take care. Bye-bye.